All right. So I'm just some examples of data and websites that I prepared just to explain about the the XOR URLs thing that we've been working and discussing about. So I have several scenarios to show. I'm gonna start by the simple case, which is just the website publish on a public name and a service name, so you can browse it using a human readable URL. So I'm gonna start by that, which is this website that I uploaded. I'm working on just on a mock file. So what you see there is the content of the index HTML. What I'm gonna try to explain now is also what I'm also trying to describe it in the websites themselves as kind of a tutorial. So eventually we can publish this on the network, and this becomes a tutorial itself. You can follow links and understand what are the possibilities or the potential of all this. So as we said, this is just public name, service name, human readable URL that we see here. This page is the index HTML file that is published with that set of files. So as we know, a website is a files container stored on the network. So at the moment, I'm saying files container because I'm trying to abstract or move away from the actual implementation, which is at the moment our NFS data representation or NFS convention, but we will probably move to RDF format. So that doesn't really matter, right? Like we have files containers. They have like a list of files with their paths, and they map to where the files are stored on the network, right? And then on the DNS side, right? So with the human readable URLs, what we do is we map the service name, in this case, my subdomain. We map it to where that files container is stored on the network, right? And then we use the path, that is in the files container to access to different files. So we start by accessing the index.html because that's what we use as the default entry point for a files container. But we also have other files, like you have my notes, JSON, my image, PNG, and we have a folder, which in the NFS format that we have now is a flat path. It's my folder / and the name of the file. So if we access those files from a files container, right? Like let's say my notes JSON. So if I click here, you see we are trying to access the JSON file located at this path, which is the root path of my files container. Now, we are being rendered here rather than being downloaded by the browser because the content type of this file is also stored in the files container, right? So in the same place we store the path in the files container, we also have all the metadata, which is like the file name as part of the path, content type, file size, creation date, all those type of metadata. So that's how we, from the browser, are able to render it on the page and not just download it, right? So if the content type is unknown, what happens is the browser is going to download the file. I'm realizing I should have published maybe another file with an unknown content type or something, but anyway. So, and the same happens if you have an image, right? This is a PNG. So if I open this image, again, because the content type is stored in the files container and we have the file name, so we can render it properly on the browser. And lastly, so here what I'm just showing is that there are different ways you can access those files, right? Using the path. You can use an absolute path to the files container, a relative path, or you can use the full URL, right? Like in this case, which is the public name, service name, and the full path of the file, even if it's a subfolder, right? So this is just another HTML, and again, we are rendered as an HTML correctly because the content type is stored in the files container. Now, so this is the normal case. This is what we've been using in Alpha 2, and everybody knows about. So I'm just explaining this as a context. So, so any comments or questions this far, Hunter, Josh?
Not so far.
Okay. Hunter, you okay? Okay. So now let's imagine what happens if you have this files container, which is a website that you uploaded using the web hosting manager or any application, right? So you uploaded the same set of files, right, for a website, but you don't publish it under any public name or service name, right? You have just the files container stored on the network at a random address. So this is when you can start playing with the XOR URLs, right? So I can obtain the XOR URL of that files container, and I can simply share that with anybody, and they should be able to access that files container and see the website in the same way, right? But using just a XOR URL. So you see, this is a modified version of the index HTML, right? So this is the context, again, of the index HTML. The only difference is that I'm accessing the files container using the XOR name. I'm not resolving its location using a public name and the service name, right? So this is, yeah, so this is still a files container. It's still at the moment with the NFS format, it's the same. The only difference so far, what I'm showing is I'm not using a public name and a service name. I'm going directly to where that files container, or how people are calling it now, the NFS container, is stored, and reading the paths of each of the files, the content type, all the metadata, just exactly the same way, right? So if I access my nodes JSON, it's going to happen, it's going to do the same. It's going to take the content type from the files container and render it on the browser. And the same will happen with the image, right? I'm going to close these previous tabs here. And the same, you know, I can also use the full path, full URL with the full path of a file, right? And again, it's going to be able to render it because the content type of this HTML page is in the files container that I'm finding at this XOR address. So this is not the XOR address, but this XOR-based location, right? So this is another thing that you can do. Any comment, questions before I go into one other case? Okay. So now let's say I said that this is still a files container, right? So I'm still using the like NFS emulation or any other type of API we use to store files containers. But let's say instead of doing that, I just store on the network these files all separate, right? I store an index HTML, I store a JSON, a PNG, and another HTML. And from my HTML file, I want to link them using a URL, right? So this is what I'm going to show you here. So this other file, this is a URL using the XOR URL of an immutable data file, which happens to be an HTML file, right? Now, the first thing is, okay, I have the XOR URL, so I can go and fetch the immutable data content. I can get all the content of the file, but I don't know that it's an HTML file. So as probably you already know, like we are already encoding the content type in the XOR URL itself. So by sharing this URL, I already know where to find the file, basically the immutable data location. And also in the URL itself, I have the content type, which in this case has a text HTML encoded in it. So if I go to this URL, I should be able to fetch a file, an HTML file, directly from the immutable data location and render it as an HTML page because the content type is encoded in the URL, right? You okay with me so far? You following? Okay. So this HTML file, which is an immutable data in this case, now, it's just an HTML and I have links to different files. So again, this is an HTML page or a website, if you will. It's actually a website, but it's linking to these other files rather than having them in a files container. So these are just links to other random places. They are not random because they are immutable data. We know that, how that happens, but basically links to files in any locations on the network, right? So let's say this other link here is a link to another file, which is a JSON file. Now, again, how do I know how I'm going to be able to render this on the browser as a JSON? Is because the application JSON content type is in the URL, is encoded in the URL itself. And the address of the JSON file is also encoded in the URL. So I can fetch the immutable data content, get the content, and then from the URL decode the content type and render it as a JSON file. And obviously the same happens. Let me close all this again. The same happened with an image. This is another case. The same for another HTML file or any other files you want to link, right? So this HTML is an immutable data. I'm fetching it using its source name, and the content type I know is an HTML because it's encoded in the URL as well. So that's the other thing you could start doing with this. Any questions or comments with this so far? I'm just trying to remember if I'm missing something here. Yeah, go on. Yeah, so this thing, I can try to find the, let me find out. What is the post? Here. So I guess you remember this thing, which, this is a content ID, right? So this string is a content ID using the spec with the multi-format, multi-codecs, right? So in that string, what you have is, that string is this seed, right? So a seed, which is described here, right, encodes which is the hash function used to, for the XOR URL. It also has the content type, right? And you also have information about the seed version itself. So like, there is an example I remember putting it somewhere here. Yeah, this is a good example. So you see, this is a seed, and when you decode it, you get, the base. In our case, we're now using base 32, and then we have the multi-codec. This one has raw encoded as the multi-codec. This is where we put the content type. So basically, instead of raw, if you decode the URL, this seed actually, you decode this seed. I'm gonna try to do it, but it's not gonna work. But I'll explain why. If you decode this seed in here, you should get here as the multi-codec HTML, right? And then you should get here, well, this is SHA-3, it would be the same. Now, if I try to decode this here, it doesn't work because multi-codec project at the moment doesn't support any MIME type. It doesn't have in the list any MIME type yet. So I already sent a PR to that project with a bunch of MIME types, right? So we can encode different MIME types. And I'm using that branch for my demo here, right? So my fork of the multi-codec project and the seed is already supporting MIME types, right? But that's the reason why this decoder doesn't. Eventually, if that PR is merged in whichever forms, you should be able to put here the seed, and you should be able to see the codec, which is the content type, the multi-base, which is going to be base 32, and so on. I actually wanted to put the links here, but I realized that because those multi-codecs are not there, then it won't work. But yeah, is that clear? Right. Okay. Okay. Josh,
No questions. Love it. Let's get it in.
Okay. So I have another case. Okay. Then, once you start having these XOR URLs, what happens is that you can basically browse the network, and you can start fetching any content on the network, right? It doesn't matter if they are not linked to a public name. So when you have that, you can end up hitting maybe some files container or mutable data or any type of data. And I thought maybe you may want to still be able to see and render it in a nice way, so you can start browsing data on the network, right? Browsing the native data that the network has. So if for the network the files container, web IDs, and some RDFs are first-class citizens, then I think, okay, maybe the browser should allow you to browse and follow links of those first-class citizens, right? And so this is when I start playing with other thing, which is kind of how to allow the browser to become a data browser, like a native browser, native data browser, right? So let's say I have this public name, and I have a website, but this website doesn't have an index.html, right? So the moment what you get is, if you get on Alpha 2 and our latest release of Peruse, what you get is file not found. But we can, start showing a file browser, right? Because in this case, there is no index.html, so I can just show the content of the files container in this case, so I can click on each of them, like it would happen with any web server, right? In any web server, when you hit a location where there is no index.html, then you get this type of file browser or file view, whatever, right? Yeah, so this is just another thing that we could start adding to the browser, right? Now, this, again, if you get a files container and you get just the XOR URL, you should still be able to do the same, right? Because it's still a files container. We can still treat it as websites and find all the files for the website. and you can still, you should still be able to browse the files. I'm not sure why it's not fetching it now. Maybe it's the wrong address. Let me see. It's supposed to be the same. This sorry URL is supposed to be the same location of the. Ah, okay. Yeah, it was just taking long, but sometimes, you know, when I have lots of data on the mock, it starts becoming quite slow, the mock itself. And then if I remove the mock, it's faster. Yeah, yeah. So anyway, you see from the address of the files container and getting the source URL of that files container, I can still browse and I can still go and fetch different files that are linked from it, well, stored like in the files container and everything, right? Now, if you know, when you start thinking of this, then you also start thinking, okay, what happens if the source URL is not a files container, but it's something else, right? Let's say it's just mutable data thing, right? So that's the other scenario that I was thinking of. Like, let's say I give you a source URL of just mutable data that I'm storing, right? I'm using some application which stores mutable data with some information, right? Like nodes, whatever. So in this case, I was like, okay, so maybe the browser should just allow you to still see the content of this mutable data, because if the mutable data is the native data type, why we wouldn't be able to browse it and follow links? So here, what I'm just doing is rendering the mutable data content. You know, you have the entries, the key, the version, the values, and the different permissions. This one has only one permission set. But, you know, we can start like, okay, allowing to follow links if they are in the values. So if I follow this, which is another mutable data that I have, right? And this is so, and this one also has some other links, like to public names URLs, but it could have, you know, any type of links, right? This is the one from the second scenario that I showed before. So by having this, I think this is when you see linked data happening, and you can even browse it using our browser, right? In this case, it's just mutable data with some JSON file and some nodes, whatever, right? Yeah, okay. And so, like, it depends which are our first-class citizens. We can enhance this type of browsing experience, right, from the UI. Like, if it's JSON, maybe show it in a pretty printing way. If it's an RDF, maybe format it in a nice way, and you can choose here maybe, okay, render it using JSON LD or Turtle, or just show me this kind of mutable data browser so I can follow links. You know, you can start doing many things from UI, right? But regardless of what you do, what I'm saying this is, okay, the browser of the Safe Network allows you to browse the data, the native data itself, and follow links. And that's how you kind of start experiencing the linked data style, right? Even when you have data not published at public names, right? They have just source URL links and so on. So just as another example, what happens if I have a web ID store, right? So I can still use the web ID. We know all this. This is from our proof of concept already. So if I enter the web ID URL here, we know that we are rendered as a turtle and return it, right? But what happens if I give you the source URL of the web ID profile document, which at the moment in our proof of concept is mutable data. So you will see, all the content of that web ID, which is the RDF that we are storing in JSON LD. Obviously, I'm not like formatting it really nice, but we could, enhance this to show a nice RDF viewer or format. And you can even follow links here. Like if I click here again, I'm gonna go back to the turtle one. So, the same happens with any. This is just to show that it doesn't matter if what kind of format or convention you are following, but what you are storing it on a mutable data. You should still be able to see it from here, right? From this mutable data explorer, let's say. So I think that's all I have for the XOR URLs, like publishing. I don't know, do you have any more questions, comments, ideas? I have one more thing to show, but before I do that. Josh, Hunter?
Nothing specific to add. Keep firing in.
Okay. Hunter, you okay? So the last thing I want to show is I created some web IDs. I create your web IDs even. So I have a Hunter. But I think I'm already logged in with my account. Let me close this. I have to run. So I have my web IDs. Let me. This is. Was NPM? I don't remember. Was NPM or YAR? NPM? No, Josh, do you remember this? I think it was NPM.
Both should work.
Yeah. So I have a modified version of Pattern here. And I open it. And I'm gonna open Hunter's file or wall. Right. So this is a Hunter's goal. So and I'm gonna identify myself with my web ID, right? Should go back. Now identify myself. So I can post here, hello Hunter, right? What's up? But since we have these XOR URLs, I can start sharing files. This is the use case that I think everybody started thinking about when we started discussing about these XOR URLs of links. So now, because I have the XOR URLs, I can just share a file, which probably gonna share this image. And what I'm doing here with this pattern version, I'm taking the extension name to realize the content type. I'm uploading this file. So uploading this file as an immutable data and generating the XOR URL using, well, obviously the immutable data location and also using the MIME type that I got from the extension, right, of the file. So I should be able to post this. So what Pattern does is, post the comment, whatever, and then the link to the file that it was uploaded with the XOR URL, right? So now I'm sharing a file without needing to publish it with a public name or anything. So if I click here, I get the image, right? And So here you can see that I'm seeing the image because the content type is in the URL, and the URL also knows where the immutable data is, right? So if I, let's say, let's try another type file with an HTML, right? So, I have. Here I have some HTMLs. The index HTML. So I'm gonna post this, and again, you know, post the message, and it generates a new link with the HTML file, right? So it should be able to render again because the HTML content type is in the URL, and so on. And even this one, because this one has the URLs on my mock, I think, so it should work also. Yeah. So this is the HTML I uploaded into this mock. So the URLs you see here are the ones that I already uploaded to show you. So you see all the links are working there. So yeah, this is the other use case that we've been, like many people, I think, we've been talking about for whenever we have this type of links, right? So sharing a file is quite simple. Just upload the file, get the XOR URL, make sure you put the content type so they can render on the browser, and that's it. And you share the URL. Yeah, and actually doing this in this is not Putter. You know that I'm competing with Putter, as many of you know. This was quite easy because once you have the only thing I'm doing here is as an experimental thing in the immutable data API. I just added an optional flag that you can say, apart from giving me the source name, give me also the content ID, so I can construct the a URL. And also you can provide the content type in the function call. So the content ID will already have not just the source name embedded, encoded, but also the content type, right? So that's how I create those links here, right? So yeah, that's it actually. That's the last scenario I prepared. I was thinking of other ideas like rendering a web ID, right? Like at the moment, when we do this, we are returning the turtle thing, and this is just because the spec in the web ID for the internet, for the ClearNet, says that a web ID you should be able to fetch it with a web ID URL, and it should be returned in turtle format by default, but it should also allow you to return it in different other formats like JSON-LD. So that's why we are returning as a turtle. But if we have the browser to be, to allow you to browse and see things, native type of data, we can render the profile here in the same way that it's being rendered by Putter, right? So we can show something like the profile like this already from the browser itself when you just fetch a web ID URL, right? But I didn't spend time on showing that. So yeah, that's it. Don't know what you think. If you have some other ideas, comments.
Just to comment that if you wanted to not have an ugly URL, but you've uploaded it with an ugly URL, what could we possibly do about such a thing?
So what do you mean?
Instead of having, you've got your URL there that is the base32, the content ID URL,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you want to put your website that's under this URL somewhere else, under something, a pretty URL.
Mm-hmm.
How would we do that?
So you mean after you have this, let's say,
yeah, theoretically. I know we don't have the capability to do it right now, but it's possible, right?
Web page. Yeah. So are we just want to understand if this, you see, we're talking about, you have this website here, right? Right? You're saying that if you want to publish this website in a human readable and nice URL?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, we don't have that, but we just need to adapt, like, let's say the web hosting manager, for example, or any app that you can use to manage your public names. So the app would do is like, okay, which public name you want? Okay, Josh. So you put Josh. Which service you want to publish your website at? My website. Okay. And then you maybe provide this URL, right? Or this content ID to the app. And the app can create an entry in the public names container, right? In the public name container, Josh, add an entry for my website service name and link it to this location. And then everything will work as it's working at the moment, right? Which is just linking a public name and service name to a files container or to an HTML file, right? Right.
Cool. Yeah.
In that case, if you provide the link, you don't even need to specify the content type in the public name container, right? Because it's already in the URL. So the only thing we need to do is just follow the link, and we'll find out that it's an HTML when we decode the URL. Okay. I don't know if you have anything else you want to talk.
No, nothing else I would add.
Okay. All right. So one of the next steps, I guess, is try to put all this in an RFC, because at the moment, only thing we have is this thread here on the forum. But I think it's probably time to start creating the RFC. So we can, I guess, discuss anything offline if you have comments or questions. But that was it. That's all I want to share, and see how if we can get more ideas or how we move on with this, you know. But that's it.